Welcome, everybody. My name is Renee Klein, and I am your moderator tonight, and thank you for coming out. I'm a Jefferson County resident. I live in Port Townsend, and we found this corner of the world 18 years ago and are never leaving, so like most of us that are here, right? During the daytime, when I'm not moderating, I do have a consulting business that works with for-profit and not-for-profit companies, and I'm also a yoga teacher, yoga therapist, so I recognize some of you from those different avenues of my life, but appreciate you being here. This is the election forum. We have two groups that we'll be meeting with tonight and hearing from tonight, and the first group, as you can see up here on my right, straight ahead for you folks, we have the county prosecutor candidates, Michael Haas and James Kennedy. We're going to hear from them. We'll have questions from you folks. We'll take a brief intermission, and then we're going to be hearing from the district court judge candidates as well, and that'll be Noah Harrison and Mindy Walker. I'm sure several of you have been to candidate forums before. This is my first time moderating, so you'll forgive any mistakes that I make along the way or nudge me to do it right. We think that learning about candidates and issues in elections is about the most important thing you can do in our democracy, so congratulations for caring and for coming out. I also want to recognize that both the Peninsula Daily News and the Leader are here covering these important times, and so we appreciate the media coming out to record what these candidates have to say and hear your questions as well. So let's see. We've got a couple of things we want to talk about. This event is sponsored by the League of Women Voters and the American Association for University Women, so thank you to those two groups. You'll be hearing from them in just a moment. Yay. Yes. Applaud, applaud. If you have not yet silenced your phone, this would be an awesome time to think about doing that, just like they tell you to do at the Rose Theater. Shut your phone off, please. And we have some volunteers tonight to thank as well. So Dennis Daneau is our videographer, Gary Embricht is our sound technician, and Jockey Ossie is our timer. Thank you. And those applauses are great now, because later on we're going to ask you to hold applause when we actually get into hearing from the candidates and the questions. So before we hear from those candidates, we'd like to invite a couple of folks up. So Sheila Murphy is the unit chair for the local League of Women Voters. Sheila.
Thank you all for coming. I want to really thank Renee, God, I do a brain freeze, for moderating. It's difficult to find people who are willing to do this job. And it's nice that the candidates show up, because sometimes they don't, so so thank them for showing up. And thank you for coming, and if you really want to support forums like this, we'd like you to donate in the back for all those delicious goodies, because that's what makes these things happen, that pay for this venue. And we have great support with AAUW, and we really appreciate that. And thank you for coming, and I know you're all going to vote.
Catherine Buchanan from the AAUW.
Yes, welcome you all tonight. Thank you for coming. I am the public policy chair for the AAUW local branch. Our local branch has over 200 members. We are, our mission is equity for women and girls through research, education, and advocacy, and equity for all. We support all kinds of school projects. We do these programs. We support STEM programs. We do math programs in preschool, elementary reading, literacy, and math competency. And we're so glad that you are here for this other part of what we do, is supporting our public policy programs. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. So we have a few rules for tonight. The first is to know that we're all here to learn as much as we possibly can, and so that means we're going to listen respectfully. And from this point until I say it's okay to clap, I'd like no more clapping, please. No more clapping, cheering, booing, hissing, any grunting noises, sounds that might indicate you are for or against something that the candidates have said. We really want to have a chance that everyone can listen, please. And so if you're tempted to applaud, hold your hands like this, or assuming assuming you know the person next to you, you can hold their hand. Ask permission first, please. When it's time to ask a question, you have a couple of options. On the back table are small note cards. I know some people would prefer to write their question. That's fine. If you do so, please write clearly and neatly so that I can read it as best as possible. But otherwise, you're welcome to stand up and ask questions in the microphone in the back. We do ask that you use the mic, and we want you to speak right into the mic so that the sound and video folks can pick up everything you say and so that everyone else can hear. We're going to start with a 3-minute introduction by each of the candidates. We're going to start with Mr. Haas because H comes before K in the alphabet. They will each have 3-minute opening statements and 2 minutes for answering questions of yours. Jackie in the front is going to hold up a yellow card when there's 1 minute left for the candidate to speak, and a red card when that time is out and when we need to move on. And we're going to alternate the question. When you ask your questions, we'll alternate which candidate answers first. I think those are all of the rules that I have. Gentlemen, do you have any questions for me before we start?
No, ma'am.
All right, great. We are ready to start, and so I'd ask Mr. Haas to go first.
Okay. Well, thank you, folks, for coming out. Thank you, League of Women Voters, for hosting this. This is a great opportunity to be out here. My name is Michael Haas. I'm the Jefferson County Prosecuting Attorney. I've been an attorney now for 30 years. I've spent 15 of those years in prosecution, 11 in criminal defense, and the rest in civil. That's a long way of saying that I've got a fairly broad background. The office itself consists of a total of 5 attorneys, the elected, and then 4 deputy prosecutors. Within that breakdown, 75% do criminal work and 25% do civil work. So we've got 3 criminal and 1 civil deputy prosecutor. It's important, I think, for the elected in the position, regardless of who you hire as your next prosecutor, to have a broader base of experience so that they can provide assistance, not just on the criminal side of things, but also on the civil side. For example, I was meeting with my civil deputy the other day, and we were talking about issues related to the gun moratorium. And there are other there's other civil litigation that the county is involved in, and so you need to have some experience there to understand what the county actually does. We serve basically as the district attorney, if you will, on one part of the job, and then the other is basically corporate counsel for the county. I'm very pleased with the team that we have. The team that, one of the issues that's cropped up is turnover. Well, turnover can be a problem. It can also give you an incredible opportunity. In our particular case, we turned that into an opportunity, and we have expanded the team that I came on board with. Went from, I don't know, I think an average of maybe 10 years experience, and now it's close to 22 years experience. There's charts against the windows there that show the experience difference between the 2 of us, between myself and my opponent. In terms of things that we've accomplished, I'm very happy that we put to bed the Pierce case. We have put together a Moses Belize case, which is, no one really knew about that, but it's an attempted murder case from long ago. Some of these cases come back from years and years ago. We've prosecuted successfully a murder case, 2 vehicular homicides. We resolved a major public records case within just a few days of bringing on our new chief civil deputy prosecutor. So I think that at this point in time, the office is being run extremely well. We have an incredible team of attorneys. The county itself is looking forward to new opportunities. I was just at a meeting today. We hope to be getting a sexual assault nurse examiner program up and running. I hope that somebody will ask me what keeps me up at night.
Good evening, everyone. My name is James Kennedy, and I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters and the American Association of University Women for holding this forum tonight. I'm currently a deputy prosecuting attorney in Clallam County, where I prosecute adult felonies, and it's really across the spectrum, whether it's vehicle, felony traffic crimes, homicides, identity theft, property crimes, drug crimes, sex crimes, pretty much the whole spectrum. I currently live here in Jefferson County with my wife and my 3 kids, and I know many of you have been to the these forums before and have heard me talk about much of my leadership and management experience and why I think that matters. However, I'm going to skip that tonight. You can go to my website and read about that. I want to talk about my vision for the office, though. Many of you have heard, with respect to current events lately, that when a woman gets up and says that she's been sexually assaulted, that's not evidence. When they testify and provide sworn testimony that that's not evidence, we still need evidence. To my coworkers and fellow prosecutors, that makes us want to tear our hair out because sworn testimony is evidence. But the fact that no one seems to think it is illustrates the current problem that we have prosecuting these cases in America. An allegation results in a denial. When we have DNA evidence that shows up, well, then that just means it was consensual. We have to get a lot better at how we do this. This is a very rapidly evolving area in the law. It's making up for decades of neglect, and we can't do things the way we've been doing them for the past 30 years. I've been to a lot of training on this, a lot of the newer cutting-edge stuff on how we can corroborate this, how we can successfully prosecute this, and this is what I want to bring to Jefferson County. It's a big problem in our county. We're not the most violent county in the world. No one's going to claim that, but we do have our fair share of sexual assault and child molestation. All too often, these crimes do not get prosecuted successfully because we're not using the latest tactics and methods on how to do this. So what I want to bring to this county is this type of training. I really want to prioritize it. I want to get our people there. I want them to become experts in it. I'm tired of seeing these cases not get successfully prosecuted. There's an ethos I want to bring called start by believing. You can't have any successful case or prosecution if the person that's listening to it doesn't believe it. I think it's essential that every time someone comes forward that we sit down with them and that we start by believing. Doesn't necessarily mean that every case can be successfully prosecuted or charged, but we want to create an environment where people feel like they can come forward. There's a lot of groundwork that we have to make up for here. There's a lot of good training out there. I want to take advantage of it. That's my vision for the office. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I have some questions that have already been submitted. If you have a question that you'd like to address to the candidates, please go to the mic in the back of the room. We're going to start with this first one, and we're going to start with you, Mr. Kennedy. Prosecutors have played an important role in the Black Lives Matter movement by holding police accountable. What is your position on Black Lives Matter, and what do you see as your role as holding police accountable?
So, it's sad when we have members of our country who don't feel like they matter in society. Everyone matters in society, and I think it's important that we remind ourselves that Black Lives Matter, that we even have to say it's troubling, but it's true. It's something that needs to be put forward out there so that we know that these lives don't just get swept under the rug, that it's not just another nameless, faceless shooting where someone died and we're just going to move on. We have to pay close attention to what happened, why it happened, and what we can do to make sure it doesn't happen again. I think that police accountability starts with having good communication with the police in the first place so that they know what the expectations are, that they know what the law is, that they know what the prosecutor expects and what the prosecutor is going to do when certain things happen. I think having that dialogue ahead of time can pay a lot of dividends going down the road to make sure that tragedies don't happen down the road. When we do have that type of shooting, though, we have to treat it like we would treat it anything else. I don't think that we necessarily cut people a special break just because we know them or they're fellow county employees. We understand that the police have a very difficult job to do, but they can't go around taking lives willy-nilly without the people paying close attention to it. The expectations in this county are that any police-involved shooting would be handled thoroughly and investigated. I would expect that to be done by an outside agency, and if we needed to, then we would call in the AG's office to help with that, because they have a special unit within their office to help with police-involved shootings if there is a concern that the prosecutor's office shouldn't be handling it. When I was working in King County, they were handling a police-involved shooting that I believe happened, I think it was Bellevue, but it was somewhere on the east side. And so I think there's a way to handle this professionally, but I think the big thing is making sure we have a good dialogue with law enforcement ahead of time. Thank you.
The Black Lives Matter movement has a special meaning for my family. my wife and I, over the years, have adopted 4 children, all from Ethiopia. They've come home at 3 different times. After the Trayvon Martin shooting, I felt like I had an obligation to have a conversation that a typical family in Jefferson County would not have. I mean, let's face it, we're pretty pasty here. And so, you know, I talked to my boys in particular about wearing hoodies. I don't want you to have your hoodie up. You know, if you're wearing a hoodie, keep it down. It's not fair. It's not the way it should be. But you are at greater risk than the typical, 12-year-old boy or 15-year-old boy. My oldest happens to have autism, and so him and having a hoodie scares the daylights out of me, because the first thing he receives, if he receives a command from a police officer, is he's not going to respond like the typical person. He's going to freeze up. And this is why one of the things that's really critical is making sure that our officers have proper training to deal not only with all the other million issues that crop up, but also with mental illness and people that have other difficulties. My youngest happens to have 70% hearing loss. He may not hear the officer. So, making sure that officers are trained in how to deal with people that are different than them is key. I think it's incredibly important that we hold police accountable. Fortunately, we haven't had any officer-involved shootings in recent years, but we have had officer-involved acts of violence. We had one not too terribly long ago where we referred the case out because the officer. One of the things that happens in Jefferson County is that the county worked well. Anyway, we had to refer it out to Kitsap County for review.
Can you hear me? Hi, this is Tom Brotherton, and I'm from Quilcene. And my question is, community policing is well known. Community prosecution, not so well. It has been used in Portland for 20 years and several other cities. Its basic tenet is that the prosecutor will go to the people and learn what crimes affect them the most, and then focus prosecutions on alleviating these crimes first. Please reflect on why it is not used in Jefferson County, and if elected, would you consider using it?
One of the advantages that we have in Jefferson County is we still have a relatively low crime rate. We probably have 800, 900 cases that we prosecute every year between district court, which is your lower offenses like gross misdemeanors, DUIs, bar fights, that sort of thing, and then felonies. We probably have close to 200 of those, and then we also have juvenile matters. One of the advantages we have is that as the elected prosecuting attorney, I have the time to actually read through most of the, or not most of them, but many of the police reports that are coming through. So I have a pretty good feel for what the key types of cases are that are coming through the community. Could I go out to the community? It's probably not a bad idea. I'll tell you one of the things that I really enjoyed. I have to admit that I kind of poo-pooed it initially, but our commissioners suggested that we go out last year. It was during talking about budget stuff, and we went around to the county. I don't know, I'm sure that some of you attended that, and that was really useful because it wasn't just talking about budget stuff. It was also talking about what are the issues that are important to people in terms of criminal behavior, and it's not just criminal behavior that's an issue for the populace. One of the problems that we have in this county is we have no meaningful code enforcement. We just simply don't have the resources to do that, and our office would love to do that. We've made a request in our budget last year and this year for an additional civil body to be a civil deputy prosecutor to be able to do code enforcement. So that's one thing that really affects people. Burglaries that are usually drug related have a huge impact. And I have noticed that this is a county with not too many wallflowers. People have been very, very able and ready to pick up the phone and call me if they feel like there's an issue. So I think that we actually do a pretty good job of sensing what the county folks want, but there's always room for improvement too.
I don't think it's been done simply because it hasn't been done before, quite frankly, and it also means taking a lot of time outside the normal work hours. One of the things that struck me when I started working in Clallam County was how much time my boss spent going out and meeting with different community groups. all the time, sometimes during the day, but a lot of times during the evening, oftentimes multiple times a week. And he would gain a lot of great feedback from meeting with the community, doing this all the time, so that we could make sure that as an office, our priorities were meeting that of the county. And this is something I very much want to bring to Jefferson County. The fact is that the issues that are vexing Port Townsend are not necessarily going to be the same that are important to Chimacum, which are not necessarily going to be the same as in Quilcene or Brennan. And I think it's important to get out there and talk to the people to know that what we're missing. We're not going to know what we're missing by staying in our offices. And I think that's also true of our law enforcement arm. They need to get out there too. And I think going out there, there's a lot to be learned, and a lot of the things that don't come across our desk every day. And we know how to go out there and talk to these folks and address what concerns them the most. And I think by doing that, we can definitely be more responsive to our community, and our community will have an understanding of what we do as an office and know that we're there to serve them.
Stay standing. The next one will be for you.
Yeah.
Another question that's from the back. So again, if you'd like to submit your question in writing, feel free to. There are note cards in the back. So this question is, what is your posture toward repeat offenders and parole violators?
So I believe that the criminal justice system should serve a function, and that should be to keep the person away from the criminal justice system. Usually that's in theory more than in practice. A lot of times that has to do with an underfunded Department of Corrections. But in theory, what we should be doing is addressing the underlying issues. Usually that's mental health, drugs, or both. I believe in trying to exhaust those as much as we can to try and help the individual to stay away from the criminal justice system. But there are some people who that just doesn't work, and they present a threat and a danger to our community. And I think that for those repeat people who present a danger to others, the only thing we can do is to safely sequester them away so that they don't continue to hurt people. But that said, I personally have always believed in trying to prioritize treatment options to see if we can help these individuals, to see if we can keep them away. Thankfully, the number of people who fall into the category of having to be sequestered is very small. Most of the people out there are really struggling with drug or mental health. Those are things that we can help them with. They have to want to be helped too, though. That's another component of it. But for that small fraction of people who are just, unfortunately to say, as malignant personalities, that's what prisons are for. And so thankfully we have reformed our judicial system largely here in the state of Washington to try to concentrate our prison populations on those people and try to keep out as many of the people who are involved in drugs and mental health out and focus on treatment options for them.
So that's actually a pretty complex question. As Mr. Kennedy's alluded to, we've done a pretty good job in Washington State. We don't have some of the issues that some of the other states have. About 70% of our people that are in prison are there for violent or sex crimes. The other 30% are there for nonviolent property crimes or for drug-related crimes. So we're actually doing a pretty good job of targeting the people that need to be in prison. And there are some people, unfortunately, in this community that simply need to be warehoused. No one likes that. But in terms of the repeat offenders, the people that are coming through the so-called revolving door, I think that that's where you are looking primarily at people with mental health issues or substance abuse issues, or more often than not, both. And so we have a drug court that does a great job. We've got a mental health court that does a great job. These are programs that are evaluated by the Washington State Institute for Public Policy. This is an organization, it's a bipartisan group that the legislature pieced together, and they actually do evidence-based research. You know, does this actually work? How many of you have heard of Scared Straight programs? Take a kid into jail, scare the daylights out of them. It increases recidivism. Okay, so we don't do it anymore in Washington State. Drug court, on the other hand, aggression replacement training for juveniles, mental health court, they are cost effective and they help to stop that revolving door, and they give people the treatment that they need. And so in my administration, although we have more than doubled the number of sex crime prosecutions over the prior administration, we've also doubled the number of drug court graduates. And so we are trying to get to the root causes of of the problems that many of our criminal defendants suffer from. Our mental health system is still nowhere near as robust as I think any of us in the system would like. Thank you.
I spent 35 years in the Navy, and regardless of the job, almost always I found out that leadership is a key component of the supervisor of that office or that team, whatever. My understanding, it may not be correct, is, Mr. Haas, when you first came to the office, virtually everybody quit. If that was the case, I'd like you to address what you think was going on. And for Mr. Kennedy, will you agree with that? And if not, what kind of leadership might you show if indeed that was a situation of leadership?
So that's correct. We had, as I said, 4 attorneys, and they all left the office at various times. And quite frankly, although I was never told that it was anything more than either new opportunities or whatnot, I suspect that it had to do with the differences in personality of the elected prosecuting attorney. And so I'm fine with that, because if you're not on board, the deputy prosecutors serve at the pleasure of the elected prosecuting attorney. I could have taken the opportunity to sack everybody, and that's been done in other offices, but that's not particularly productive. I wanted to wait and see if we could work together. It didn't work out ultimately, and so the choices that I made were great. I mean, they gave us an incredible opportunity. For example, my opponent at that time was a 3-year, maybe 4-year attorney. I replaced him with a 20-year attorney who had been an assistant district attorney in Los Angeles County. Some of the staff left, about 4 of the, keep in mind, we're only talking about an office with a total of 11 people right now, including myself. And so 4 of the people left for retirement purposes or semi-retirement purposes. Another one disagreed with some of my policies. Quite frankly, I was glad to see her go. When we cleaned out her desk after she left, we found a firearm that had been in, a handgun that had been in her office drawer unsecured for 8 years. So I was grateful to have that opportunity to replace that particular individual. There were others. One of my opponent's campaign manager supported the phrase "hug a thug." And that's not something that I buy into. We treat people with respect in the office now, and so those although it created tension and headaches for the office, right now we have replaced folks and we have a great team, and I'd really hate to see that disturbed. If Mr. Kennedy wins this election, he's going to walk into an incredible, skilled office.
I don't really agree with that. And it wasn't just the attorneys who left. It was almost the entire staff, save one individual who's still there. And many of the people who retired early, were not expecting to retire when they did. The reason people left is because we're in this job because we feel like it's important. The people who are called to this job are called to serve. They're called to serve their community, and they feel like it's really important, like what they do. And after my opponent took over, it became quite clear that our job was not to serve our community anymore. We weren't there to serve crime victims anymore. It very much felt like we were there to serve our local defense bar and to do whatever the defense attorneys told us to do on the cases. Many times, if they didn't like our answers, they would just go right over to our heads to my opponent, and he would give them whatever they wanted. And it became quite clear that this wasn't really a prosecutor's office anymore. It was just another defense office in town. And I have no qualms with defense attorneys. I think that they do an incredibly important job in our criminal justice system. But our justice system relies on 2 components. It requires on a prosecution, and it requires a defense. If there is no prosecution, then there's no one looking out for crime victims. There's no one looking out for the community. And that's not really a very good balance. And that's why everyone left. I think that part of the reason why I'm running is to sort of restore that balance that's supposed to exist in our system. It's no accident that, with the exception of one individual, the individual who replaced me, every attorney was replaced with another attorney who had almost entirely defense experience, virtually no prosecution experience. The jobs of defense and prosecution are sufficiently different these days that you can't just walk from one into the other. That's not to say that a prosecutor can't become a good defense attorney or vice versa, but it requires a lot of training. Thank you.
This will be, you'll start, Mr. Kennedy. Question from the written question. What support does a sexual assault victim deserve, especially upholding the rape shield law and privacy laws pertaining to rape kit evidence and sexual assault domestic violence records?
Sexual assault domestic violence records, like the kinds of records that are going to be held at the Dove House or whatever equivalent agency for the jurisdiction you're in, they're protected by a special law, and they can't be disclosed unless there's an affidavit and there's a good showing and there's all kinds of really good reasons why this might need to come out. I've never seen it, though. I've never handled a case or know of anyone who's handled a case, with the exception of my opponent on a recent case, where that came out. It's pretty surprising why that would be relevant, because if any victim of domestic violence thinks that all their records are going to become public, well, why would anyone ever want to come forward? It's the same with rape kits. There's a very similar law that protects those. Sometimes these kits involve taking up close pictures of intimate areas. In all the sexual assault cases I've seen, usually what I get is I get a written description or a drawn diagram if there's relevant evidence there. And if there really is a picture that needs to come into evidence, the nurse tells us, and then we go and we maybe just get that picture. We don't just open those up, we don't disclose them, because who would ever want to get examined by a nurse if they know that all these pictures are just going to go out into the public? I think that victims who come forward know that we're going to have their back. They need to have the confidence that the system's going to support them. It's not going to turn them over. It's not going to abuse them. It's going to treat them with respect. Because if that doesn't occur, they're not going to come forward, and sexual predators are going to go unpunished. And I think that's going to make that makes for a very terrible community. Thank you.
So a crime victim in Washington State has a constitutional right to certain protections, certain guarantees, certain rights to be notified of the status of the case, how it's proceeding, and there are also statutory guidelines that cover that as well. In our office, we happen to have 2 sexual assault crime victim witness coordinators. They function as one FTE, one full-time equivalent. They do an exceptional job working with our crime victims. As I indicated earlier, we have more than doubled the number of sex crimes prosecutions that we do in the office over the previous administration. That means working very closely with victims, doing our level best to protect them. There are still going to be some issues of contention when it comes to discovery. That's police reports, information that we have a court rule obligation and a constitutional obligation to share with the defense. Now, some of those issues we will fight to the bitter end. Other issues, maybe not so much. But at all times, we're trying to stay in touch with the victims as much as we possibly can, keep them apprised of the case. One of the things that I've heard is that we do not engage in best practices. That is not true. We actually do have engaged in best practices for the handling of sexual assault cases. We try to have a deputy prosecutor present during the interview of a victim or a witness. This is particularly true with child victims. Keep in mind that a substantial number of our crime victims are not adult females. A substantial number are juveniles. And those are, quite frankly, the most troubling cases. We spend an extraordinary amount of time with those cases. We've had some very good successes with the prosecution of those cases. And so I think that we try to do an extremely good job of staying in touch with the victims. I'm out of time. Thanks.
As we've heard, the current attorneys in the prosecutor's office have many, many more years' experience than Mr. Kennedy does. And Mr. Kennedy has said if he's elected, he would keep the current staff there. So if that occurred, I can't figure out how an attorney who has a fraction of the experience of his staff could supervise that staff.
Okay. Well, I think that's a legitimate question, and it is a difficulty. Mr. Kennedy has practiced law for a little less than 6 years, and when you look at the least experienced deputy prosecutor in the office right now, that attorney has 9 years' experience. The next one up is at the 20-year mark. One after that's at the 23-year mark, and then the 35-year mark. So it's going to be extremely difficult for anybody, even with my level of experience at 30 years. I still have trouble keeping up with our civil deputy. Aside from the fact that the guy is extraordinarily brilliant and probably one of the hardest working attorneys I've ever met, I can still contribute some to what he's dealing with, but with probably the most enjoyable part of the job is being able to meet with my other deputy prosecutors, particularly the felony deputies, and talk out cases. I wish that we could sometimes videotape what we do, because we give these cases a tremendous amount of thought. We don't just say, oh gosh, we're just going to lock this person up, or we're just going to send this person off to drug court or mental health court. There's a lot of thought that goes into the case, talking about the legal issues that exist, talking about the factual issues that exist in the case, and those are something that requires a tremendous amount of experience. And having experience from both sides of the aisle, quite frankly, helps. It's great for somebody to play devil's advocate in those conversations. We have attorneys besides myself that have been defense attorneys, but my opponent's also grossly underplaying the level of criminal experience that the attorneys in the office have in terms of prosecutions.
With the exception of one attorney in the office, I have more prosecution experience than the rest of them combined, but that's not really the issue. Yeah, the prosecuting attorney is an attorney and is expected to take a caseload and handle cases, which I will do, but it's much more than that. It's a manager and it's a leader for the office, and I have quite a bit of leadership and management experience from my nearly 6 years in the military as an officer, leading groups of people ranging in size from 20 to 70 individuals. It's a very different skill set, and I know for some of you who have owned or operated your own businesses, you know that. Trying to coordinate different people, make sure different people get assigned to where they need to go, putting people in their strengths to maximize them. We don't set people up for failure. We cross-train people to make sure that when one person leaves, another one can pick up the slack. Sometimes when people go on vacation, that might mean things slow down a little bit, but they don't come to a stop. When the civil deputy left, around the same time I did, no one did that job for 9 months because there was no cross-training. There was no incentive to try to make sure that that aspect of the office got picked up. That's unacceptable. You cannot have that. You do not serve the public when you're doing that. You have to make sure that everyone knows what their job is. You want people to know what each other's jobs are. You want people to go to trainings, and then when they come back from a great training, let's say on computer crimes, which can be some pretty complicated stuff, that they take that knowledge and they bring it back and they share it with everyone else and they help other people. So that's what leadership and management is about. It's about building a cohesive team where people work together, they know each other's strengths, they help one another, and it really makes the office, or any office, a lot better. It's not about being an attorney. Attorneys seldom get any sort of leadership or management experience. It's a kind of a lone wolf profession. You're just not going to get that usually from being a lawyer. That's where it helps having a background in leadership and management outside of being an attorney. Thank you.
We have two last questions. I think we're going to be able to get them both in. So we'll start with you, Mr. Kennedy. Why or why not use lie detector tests with a sociopath?
Well, I think lie detectors, quite frankly, are kind of a waste of time in the criminal law world. They're not admissible as evidence unless both parties agree to it. They're notoriously unreliable. Sociopaths, of course, to the extent that that term's applicable, are probably going to pass it, because I think what a lie detector is measuring is whether you think what you did is consistent or not with what the person's asking you, and a sociopath is going to pass that, which is why we would never base a decision whether to charge a rape case or any other type of case based on what the person says. I actually dealt with a case once where it was a DUI case, and the guy took a lie detector saying he wasn't drunk. Well, he was so drunk he didn't know he wasn't drunk. I mean, they're useless. We don't use them, and we would never, ever, ever base a decision to charge based on what the defendant thinks they did or not. I think it's unethical. It it's just totally unreasonable. It's not supported. I don't know of any prosecutor's office that does that. There was a troubling case here in Jefferson County where after it came back on appeal that it was dismissed because the guy who some people have called a sociopath passed a lie detector test, which also flies in the face of my philosophy of start by believing. People don't come forward and report sexual assaults just for the fun of it. They report it because it usually happened.
So my guess then is that the Sheriff's Office has been scammed out of thousands of dollars in the training that they've invested in training Detective Joe Knoll to be a polygrapher. I don't think that that's the case. I don't think that the Sheriff's Office is set out to just deliberately go out and expend money on training and resources and equipment on something that is totally and completely useless. I just simply don't believe that that's the case. Lie detectors do have a purpose. They're technically polygraphs. They are part, there's no question that they are not perfect. They are part science and they are part art. And the experience of a polygrapher is very important in determining and analyzing the results that come back from that test. Should you base a decision on a case to dismiss or to file based solely on a polygraph? Absolutely not. When you are deciding on a criminal case, how you're going to prosecute it, or if you're going to dismiss it, there are a number of factors that you're looking at. I can promise you that unlike a good wine that gets better with time, a criminal case does not age well. And the case that my opponent's referring to came back after what's called a personal restraint petition, which is basically a second bite at the appellate apple. And it was 8 years post-fact, following up on a very poor investigation to begin with. So there were, in that particular case, there were a number of factors. The polygraph was one small factor in the decision that led to that resolution of that case. But polygraphs do stand a useful purpose. They can help to resolve cases. They're not perfect, and I don't think you should put all your apples in one basket by any means, but I think it'd be foolish to just simply discount the validity. Otherwise, why has the Sheriff's Office, why does the DEA, why does the NSA, why do all these other large organizations rely on polygraphs?
About 6 months ago, a cyclist was hit and killed by a motorist in Port Townsend. Mr. Haas, what is happening in this matter? Have charges been filed? If not, why not? And Mr. Kennedy, would you do anything differently in this matter?
That case is not coming up to the top of my brain right off the top of my head, so I apologize. Typically, cases involving motor vehicles or quasi-motor vehicles like bicycles, motorcycles, involve an investigation by the detectives from the State Patrol, and there are a number of factors that go into that. On a good, if we are lucky, we will see a case investigation report in 4 to 5 months. Right now, and this is extremely distressing, not only for our criminal prosecutions, but also for our death investigations, because the prosecutor's office also serves as the county coroner. It is taking us 5 to 6 months to get results back, tox lab results back on blood samples taken from defendants, and so that is it's just creating a huge backlog. It's slowing down our ability to identify the cause of death in cases. It is slowing down our ability to prosecute DUIs. For example, if someone gets pulled over for a DUI and they refuse the test, the breath test, but there are other indicators that they had actually been using some kind of controlled substance, the officer's going to get a search warrant, and that's going to then that material is going to be sent to the tox lab, and unfortunately it's going to take 5 to 6 months to see those results. I know we had a case, I don't know if you remember the young man that caught himself on fire somehow or another. It took us 5.5 months to get the results back on that particular case from the tox lab. And so the fact that we don't have a police report back after 5-6 months would not surprise me at all.
Well, I don't work in Jefferson County right now, so I can't claim to have all the facts of this case, but I think that memorial on 19th and Landis, I think, is sort of a constant reminder that that case is out there, and I have to confess that traffic crimes are kind of a specialty of mine. I really like prosecuting them, and I think I'm pretty good at it. A lot of the times that you don't need the blood results in order to prosecute it, because a lot of the times there's going to be clues that that person is inebriated or intoxicated that a well-trained officer can pick up on and put in their report. A lot of officers really hate these types of crimes, though, and so they need a prosecutor who knows how to prosecute them to tell them what to look for. I just had that experience this morning, as a matter of fact, when I sent a case back to investigation, a traffic crime that had not been investigated properly. It also helps being on a first-name basis with most of the analysts at the toxicology lab, like I am. It tells you how often I call up their lab in order to get these blood results sped up. It's true, right now it does take about 5 months on average to get these cases through, but when you know the individuals involved, sometimes you can put the accelerator on that and get those things moved through pretty quickly. I think it's important, though, that the community know what's going on with that case, that the victims know and the victim's family know what's been going on with that case. I hope that dialogue's been taking place. I have no idea. But if the blood's not forthcoming because it's taking too long, then you might have to just move on without it. And there are ways to do that. There's a lot of things you look for. They're subtle. There's no smoking gun, so to speak, but you put a lot of these little clues together and you can paint a picture of someone who's quite intoxicated with the right kind of prosecutorial know-how. And so I just want everyone to know that I do bring that to the table, and I think that being responsive to the community, especially one with as many avid cyclists we have, is important. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. That's going to conclude our audience questions. With each candidate will now have their last couple of minutes for closing remarks. We'll start again with you, Mr. Haas.
Okay. Again, thank you so much for coming out. I would like your vote on November 6th, and I'd be very appreciative if you have other questions. If you go to my website, www.voteforhaas.com, be very careful. If you Google vote for Haas, it tends to come back vote for Hamas. I am not affiliated with Hamas. So make sure you type that right in the URL. There is a myth-busting section in my website that addresses some of the bigger ticket issues, such as over people coming in and out of the office. I love this job. It is a fast-paced job. It is constantly changing. I was working up a speech for my Rotary Club at one point in time, and I wrote down a list of everything that I did in one particular day that had any substance to it. And it started out with staffing, how to handle a rape case in the office, and then it went to dealing with a weird coroner question that cropped up. Then it came back to an employee issue for some other department. Then we came back to an appeal issue, and then it came back to a land use issue. And I don't have ADHD, but if I did, I think it would be the perfect job for somebody with that, because you are constantly moving, you are constantly engaging your brain in different areas. And I think that the thing that I have that I really bring to the job is a very broad base of experience over those last 30 years. I've handled wrongful death cases, I've handled murder cases, I've handled something as simple as a driving while suspended offense. I've represented people in federal court, and I've got federal trial experience. I've actually supervised people in 3 different law offices. I've supervised attorneys. I've mentored attorneys, probably about 15 of them. My opponent has done none. So I think that if you look at that chart and you consider all of the depth of experience that I have, the appellate experience, how to I've handled probably 30 cases. Now, that's not a whole lot of cases compared to, for example, the guy that I brought in to handle the Pierce case to wrap that up. He had 200-something appellate cases under his belt. But part of the job is also being smart enough to know when you need help. And so I love the job. I've been doing it for a while. We've got an incredible team that we've put together. This is probably the best legal team that Jefferson County has ever had, and I hope that we can keep that team together. And I see some people shaking their head, but unfortunately, they just don't know what they're talking about. Sorry.
Well, thank you everyone for coming out, and I'll be sticking around afterwards if you want to talk to me. I can assure you my affect is not quite as flat in person as it is during these forums. I want you to know that I am committed to keeping the community safe. We have had a bit of an uptick in violence lately. I am committed to serving this community. I am committed to helping the victims in this community. I am committed to helping the members of our community who suffer from drug addiction and mental illness. It is a balancing act, but it's a balancing act that can be done. It is the one that our office is required to do. I feel very strongly about this. I have a lot of support in this community from law enforcement, drug treatment counselors, court staff, county staff, even a few defense attorneys, actually. And what these people have in common is that these are the folks who work routinely with the prosecutor's office. They have daily, weekly contact with the office. Why are they coming out to support me? Because they know that this office is not what it used to be, that it has had a lot of trouble over the past few years. I've had people come up to me and express frustration that no one's there half the time, that no one answers their phone calls or returns their emails, that the office isn't responsive. That's going to change when I'm elected, and I very much hope to have your vote and your support this fall. Thank you.
Gentlemen, thank you. I'm going to thank you formally in a minute, and the audience will as well. In just a moment, you get to go back for cookies, so that's going to be reason to applaud. And I want to remind you that the League and AAUW pays for this room, so if you'd like to make a donation to help offset their costs, I'm certain there's a lovely donation box somewhere in the back. In the back, yeah. And so now we've put you guys on the hot seat because literally this room is very warm tonight. So let's give them a round of applause, please.